Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stay Grounded podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Q. And for today's episode, we will be discussing unpacking trauma and healing our inner child with Jovanna Borquez. Jovanna is a first gen Mexican American therapist with 7 years of experience in the mental health field, with primary focus of trauma and inner child healing. Through her work with clients, she provides a safe and empathetic space, assisting with their journey of self empowerment and discovery. So, everyone, help me welcome Jovanna Borquez. Hi, Jovanna. Welcome to the Stay Grounded podcast. I'm super, super excited to have you on. This is going to be an incredible conversation. But before we get started, let us know how you're feeling. How is your week going?
So I'm a little nervous because this is my first podcast ever. So I'm super excited, but still nervous. Week has been good. Clients are, coming in and things are just flowing. Today's El Día de la Virgen. So I know that this is going to be, put on later on, but I'm very excited that today just happened to be the day that we, you know, landed for us to actually.
I love that. And just so whoever's listening, it's December 12th. So this is the day that she's talking about. And don't worry about the nerves. I love that this is your first podcast interview. I feel like you have so much knowledge, and we definitely need to share that with our community. So before we get started, I do want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Who's Giovanna? What inspired to start this kind of work? Why do you do it?
So I'm a first gen Mexican American. I grew up in East LA. I think growing up, a lot of the time we were very much just, normalized to all the, trauma like with gangs and trauma within our own family, that everything just seemed perfect in this like little bubble up until I went to college and I went into graduate school, and I started seeing the outside of the like bubble and started to recognize that maybe I wasn't functioning at the quote unquote normal level. Maybe my normal was really not healthy. And, being able to recognize, I think it was my senior year during my bachelor's, I took an abnormal psych class, and being able to identify a lot of the stuff that I was feeling that was actually anxiety, that was actually geared towards more having something going on with me that wasn't the norm. I was like, oh my God, I've been functioning at this level for 20 plus years. And everybody's just like, cool, just push through. You're feeling a little sad, just get up and shower and it's a brand new day. And actually being able to see the science in back of all that and seeing how our body and our mind really gets, affected, I was like, okay, I am not the only brown girl here that's probably feeling this. And there's probably more like me out there. But then when I actually started to look for, someone to talk to, there was nobody. There was no one that looked like me. There was nobody that I was able to connect. I remember my first therapist. She was this really sweet white woman. And I started talking to her about my grief and trauma, and it was this blank stare, not really understanding why this had impacted me so, that I was like, yeah, girl, we're not gonna work out. I need to find someone who's gonna be able to match my level of energy. So yeah, I think I went into community mental health. I've been working with kiddos and families since 2016, 2017. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the work, but then also working in community mental health, I recognized that I was tied down to structure of how things needed to run during all of my sessions, that I slowly started to gear into more of a private practice setting. And I think it's the best choice that I could have ever made. I love working with all of my clients. Like if one person starts healing, it kind of ripples into other people also trying to heal, other people also recognizing that they may need a little extra help. And, COVID happened and I was stuck at home and all of these ideas started flowing because I had nothing else to do. And after my grandpa passed away in 20, I felt like I needed something to do and to create to really process all of my healing. And he was an entrepreneur. He would do all of these things, and he was always into building businesses and all of this stuff that I was like, okay, I'm not a numbers person, but I can totally do this other side of things where I get to talk to people and the business side will eventually land.
That's amazing. One of the things that I really related to was you saying that you needed to relate to your therapist. So I have personally been on a journey of trying to find one, girl, since the summer. And,
I feel you.
I've talked to a lot of people and it just hasn't worked. And I got a little, no, not a little. I was so overwhelmed that I just really stopped this winter.
Yeah.
I was like, I need a break. I'm tired of talking to people and not understanding why we're not connecting. I mean, it's obvious,
Hmm.
it's for obvious reasons. But now we're in December and I started to kind of dive back into that because, like you, there was a lot of things and generational things that I felt like I
Yep.
needed to process that I thought I was crazy. I understand living in that anxiety. And then when I was in my 20s, I was like, oh, so this is not normal?
Right.
So me waking up, and it took me going to college and talking to people, and people are like, "What are you talking about, Nat? Like, you're not supposed to wake
Yeah.
up with your chest wanting to pop out with
Mhm.
chest pain." And I was like, "Oh, I thought that was normal." And that's when I started realizing that I was living this life that was taught to me to be normal. And of course, I don't blame my parents. I think they tried their best, and I always say this, but there's
Mhm.
always room for improvement. And I
Yeah.
think I'm that generation where I'm trying to learn a lot of that. A lot of being vocal is okay, feeling emotion is okay, speaking is okay, communicating, a lot of things that in my household, and I'm sure a lot of Latino household, was not okay. So thank you for sharing that because that was extremely relatable. And then as we dive into this, because we're about to go in, guys, we have questions lined up, but to start it off, I really want to unpack trauma. So what does that look like for our community, our Latinx community? Like, what does it look like for a community as a whole and then individually as people?
So I think now more so, I'm seeing that it's kind of landing more towards generational trauma versus actual events that are happening, right? There's a difference between us going through a traumatic event and actually being raised in trauma. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that we are recognizing now more than ever, especially with I work a lot with first gen. It's all about kind of that wheel that they're carrying for everybody else, right? There's this post that I saw and then I did a little bit of research on it, and as women, bio woman, we literally have been part of generations. We were part of our great grandmother. And whatever that they went through, whether it was trauma because it was physical, it was emotional, whatever it might have been, all that carries, right? So as they're growing, they're living their lives, we're literally being carried with them. So grandma's, trauma, mom's, trauma. That's unfortunately and also fortunately part of us, right? It's built within us now. And as, someone who was raised in a very Catholic home, a lot of the feelings that were felt weren't always talked about, right? It was like, let's pray about the fact that we're sick. Let's pray to God and make sure that we're all whole. And it's like, okay, cool, but are we really addressing what the issue is? And the truth of the matter is that we never did, right? We just kind of brushed it under the rug, whether it was like infidelity stuff or whether it was family dynamics, everything was just kind of brushed under. And our bodies have carried all that throughout all of these years that we don't even know until we start talking, right? Until we start talking to our own friends or even our own community, being able to sit and being like, okay, we all grew up in this environment where we were taught as kids that it's better to be seen rather than heard, right? So being able to find your voice, that's such an an empowering thing because as children we are told that we don't have a voice. We are told that we are to listen and no is no, and you abide by rules. And as amazing as that made me turn out, I praise my parents for the way that they raised me. I think that if they hadn't been as strict and stern as like they were with me, I would not have been as well-rounded as I am today. I would not have even considered going into this field, right? But alongside all of the beauty, I think the lack of being able to voice, the lack of, you know, acknowledging the fact that emotional trauma is actually a thing, the lacking of empathy, the lacking of love actually hurts attachment, which in turn causes us to feel a certain type of way. And, trauma doesn't necessarily have to be this really massive event. It could also be the lacking thereof, right? So if we're not being fulfilled, that is an emptiness that we carry that we try to fill with all of these other things that causes us to do things that maybe if we were a little bit healthier, we would have never really done.
100%. I totally 100% agree. I, as a kid, was, and listen, my parents raised me, like I said, as best as they could. And I do commend them because I think I'm a pretty good kid. I try to be as good as I can to people, but there were like I've noticed growing
Mm-hmm.
up that communication was not a thing in my household, and I didn't
Right.
really know that until I started
Mm-hmm.
to get into relationships and I couldn't express things. And I
Right.
was like, "But why is it so hard for me to just tell someone how I feel?" And this is just
Mm-hmm.
one small example, right?
Right.
And then I realized, well, it definitely comes from my parents. Váyase para la pieza. Go to your room. Like, go. And then I would just go to my room and I'd be like, all right, well, that was the end of communicating and feeling. And so I
Right.
associated communication and feelings to that, to just brushing them off and just saying, okay, well,
Right.
that's the healthier way. When then I realized, okay, this is not healthy because none of my relationships are working. And so I
Exactly.
think it has to do, the issue is me because I would feel not offended, but I would be like taken aback when somebody would try to communicate with me. I'd be like, "What are you doing? Like, this is crazy. We don't talk about things, right?"
Of
And
course.
I started to develop this bad habit, and I'm like, "All right, well," and even in friendships, right? Any type of relationship, I was just like, I would feel offended by somebody communicating no matter
Right.
how they said it. And it was really not them coming from a bad place. It was them coming from a very honest and vulnerable place. And it just took me a while to associate that. Now I'm more aware. Of course, I'm in my
Of
30s, and
course.
so things are very different. But I remember, like you said, being young and just not even, it's not an event. It's really trauma that comes from all our generations. And I love that
Mhm.
you made that distinction because people associate trauma, because the word is so big,
Yeah,
with just a one thing that happened to you. When in
something has to happen.
reality, right, but nothing in specific has to happen. It can, right? It can,
Correct?
but it comes from all our ancestors, and we're unlearning and learning, unlearning and learning all of these things that really they didn't know better, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the books that I usually give clients as a first look is In Adult Children of Emotionally Immature
I
Parents.
can relate to
Been
that. I can relate to that. This will also be in the resources, all of the stuff that we talk about,
yes.
just an FYI to everybody. But yes, please go on, Jovana.
So this has been my entry point and kind of intro when clients are very much like, well, I know that things weren't normal, but I don't want to blame my parents, right? And you doing your own healing, it doesn't mean that you have to blame anybody for anything that happened, right? I think that that is the problem when it comes to healing, trying to find fingers to kind of blame of like, oh well, I didn't get this from X person, so now I'm the way that I am. And it's like, okay, yeah, but if you're stuck in that mindset, you are always going to be stuck with that, and that person is always going to have quote unquote control of you because you're letting them gear the way that you are based on one or a few things that they might have done to you.
And one of the things that, and this is my saying, I always say this, have been saying it for a couple years now. It is not your fault what happened to you, but it is
Mm-hmm.
your responsibility to change it, right? Yes, we can feel sorry for ourselves, but is that going to change the fact that it happened? No. Am I
No,
saying that it's going to be easy to process? No. Awareness and growth and healing is hard work.
it's
It is hard, and the thing with that is there's never really gonna be an endpoint to that. You're always gonna learn
no,
new things about yourself, and unfortunately, some people think that there's this final destination, and there's
no,
there's
there
not.
there really isn't. And I think there's this one client that's popping into my head. We've been working together for a few years now, and I always have to remind them this isn't a, cookie cutter type of plan. We could gear shifts at any which second because that one memory that you may have of you hurting or of you feeling a certain type of way, it might be linked to multiple things, right? So, yes, we are starting at point A, but it doesn't mean we're going to get to point B. We could get to point D and E and completely forget about B until we are triggered and we're like, oh, we kind of got to go back now, right? There is no guide that I could give anybody and be like, here, if you follow A through Z, you are going to feel your very best and you are going to be your best blossoming self. I'm sorry. Healing is not pretty. Healing is hard. Healing involves you getting into the yuckiness of all the feelings that you've ever just kind of stuffed down and literally vomiting everything out. And
Oh
that
my
doesn't feel
God.
good.
It does not, and you know what it is? That word healing sounds so nice. Healing,
Oh,
like
yeah.
it sounds so nice and spiritual, but there is so much to unpack in that one word. And I love how you said it. We can go from A to C, D, E, and not really come back or notice B until we're triggered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened to me so many times where I will be triggered by something and I'm like, where did this come from? I'm extremely
Yeah.
confused as to why this came up when I didn't even know this was a feeling. And that's what I mean by it's not a linear journey. It takes practice, it takes patience, it takes finding out very unpleasant parts of ourselves, I've discovered, unfortunately, through experience.
Yeah. And it's not pretty. And I I tell clients, I think that this is just the way that I was raised. My grandma would always say, God gives only the toughest people the toughest things for them to deal with, right? And I tell my clients the same things. I'm like, you know what, as a first gen who is breaking cycles, who is being insightful, and who is recognizing all of the dynamics that weren't healthy, you have this blessing that you are the chosen one to break all of those cycles. And it sucks. It sucks that it's this really heavy burden that now you have to carry and that you have to break, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah, someone has to do it, and it's hard for our first gens. It's hard. It's really
It
hard, and
is.
from experience, and that's kind of go into the second question that I have for you.
Mhm.
In what ways does acknowledging this historical trauma that we have contribute to our healing process? Because as much as we acknowledge it. Now, what do we do with it? What do we do
Yeah.
when we acknowledge this? How can this contribute to us breaking these generational cycles that we're trying to change and grow from?
I think it just helps open up your eyes to what it is that you're actually working towards. Because a lot of the time when people come in and consult because they're looking for someone, they're usually coming in because something happened, right? A life-changing event happened or some type of transition happened that now they're trying to figure out why it is that they're feeling the way that they're feeling, right? And I typically call that very surface stuff, right? Like it's very surface stuff that we get to talk to, we get to manage symptoms, we get to just kind of work on that one thing that you're coming in for, right? But being able to recognize how that one thing is connected to your childhood, to your, attachment style, to the way that your family functions, to your support, to you being able to set boundaries. This one thing comes with 20,000 other things that if you aren't willing to acknowledge or you aren't willing to look at it face forward of this is part of who I am because of how I grew up, then you're always going to be coming back for that one event, right? Like, yeah, I feel great. I'm not crying every day. I'm just going to stop. And it's like, okay, wait. But did we recognize where it's coming from? There's a reason why these feelings pop up. There's a reason why our body's feeling a certain type of way. There's another book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. Our body and our mind are such amazing things that we get to work with. And I think we take it for granted a lot of the time, right? As you know, children, I used to work with kiddos from age 4 all the way to 10, right? And a lot of the time when they did go through anything in terms of trauma, their brain would either blank it out or it wouldn't be such a big deal, right? Because as you know, children or just our brain in general, when pain is too much to handle, sometimes we just block out. Or sometimes it just files it into a file of, we're never going to talk about this again. We're going to file it there and we're never going to think about it and we're never going to recognize that it even happened, right? But our body remembers, our body recognizes, our body still holds all of those feelings, even though our brain isn't making that connection with it.
Wow, that's a lot to take in, but I totally 100% agree. As a kid, I used to be extremely, I guess you could say, angry,
Hmm.
and I didn't know where that came from. And then through therapy and things like that, I realized, my dad was a great father. He's a great dad, but his style
Right.
of reprimanding was yelling sometimes. And
Hmm.
it was intense. It was not just yelling, it was
Right.
an insanity amount of yelling. And so I
Hmm.
feel like I stored that anger in my body.
Yep.
And I would feel the tension in my shoulders, but I thought again it was normal because
Of
I was a
course.
teenager just making a fuss. As
Hmm.
kids, we're just making a fuss. And even now that I'm more aware, I feel a lot of things in my body. If I'm not if I'm not actually bringing awareness to them and figuring out where they're
Hmm.
coming from, I truly feel it in my body. The next day, I wake up groggy, or I wake up tired, or I wake up tense. I've
Yep.
actually heard of that book that you're talking about. So that's very interesting that you brought it up. I think this is a sign that I actually have to read it myself. So I'm going to put that on my list. And of course, like I said, everything that Jovanna talks about, we will be adding to the resources. So please feel free to look in the show notes so that you get that information. But
Mhm.
as we're talking about childhood, right? You started talking about childhood. The concept of healing your inner child is very interesting to me. I love doing inner child work. I think
Mhm.
it's incredible, but it is also scary, right? Because a lot of things come up. Just like you said, as kids, we put certain things in a little box where we're just like, we don't come back to it. And we don't
Yeah.
know that they're there or that they exist because as kids, we just store it. So, my question to you is what is the concept of healing your inner child really? mean? That's the first part of the question. And why is that relevant in the context of trauma and what we're talking about?
So, at least to me, that term and the work that I do with my clients is being able to heal the wounds that we just kind of patched up with band-aids, being able to go back and actually taking off those band-aids and going into those files and telling ourselves that we are going to be fine if we process it, right? Because I feel that a lot of the time, as you know, kiddos, we don't process things, not because we don't have the capability to, because I work with kids as young as 4, right? So I know that they're capable of processing. It may look very different from how we process, but they are definitely processing. But fact is that when we don't feel safe, we don't want to process. We don't want to feel. So if you are 4, 5, and your parents are yelling, or your parents are going through things, or when you are 5 and you are, translating documents because you're the only person at home who knows how to speak English and knows how to read English, and you're trying to figure out what these big old words to share with your parents, that's not a sense of safety, right? I feel that a lot of the time people look at safety as like you just have to be physically safe, and it's like, yes, but we also have to feel emotionally safe in order for us to be vulnerable, for us to be able to talk about the yuckiness. And as adults, when we get into relationships, when we start having our own children, all of our wounds, all of those band-aids, they are slowly coming off because you are being triggered either by your partner, by your child, doing all the things that you probably once did, and you're kind of stuck between, I know that I need to be better, but I'm still hurting because of what I went through.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The whole reading the mail thing. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And not understanding certain words, it's just like, so what are you going to school for? And like,
Mhm.
what do you mean? Because 5. I'm like 8. I don't know. I'm learning how to read words, not sentences.
Right.
And that's very traumatic. And I didn't even think about that until right now, you mentioning it. I thought
Mhm.
because of course, as first gens, that's very normal.
Yeah.
I used to read my grandpa and my grandfather's stuff, and if I didn't understand, they would look at you like you had 30 heads, but you're just a child trying to understand. So that is
Yep.
something that even having this conversation triggered me a little bit.
Of
And
course.
even, for example, with my dad, when he yelled, like I said, he was very strong. If he tried to tell me to either read something or even fix a TV, for example, and I didn't know, it's like, so what are you going to school for? And I'm like, well, I'm not learning how to fix a TV at school. I don't know.
Right.
And back then, obviously, technology is not what it is today. Back then, everything was a whole mission. I remember having to get off the internet so I can talk on the phone. It's not like today where things are so different. It was a little more difficult back then. And so
Right.
there was also guilt and shame that then came with that. A lot of guilt and shame. I
Yep.
was like, oh, so then I'm not even worthy because I can't even help my own parents.
And that is where all the worthiness stuff comes from. That internal monologue that we carry of we're not enough. We need we need to work in order for us to get love, right? Making sure that everybody was taken care of in order for you to be like, okay, I did amazing today. I made sure that all the mail was read. I made sure that I did everything that you asked me. Can you love me now? Am I like finally worthy of you loving me now?
So it's so crazy how just that little action
Mm-hmm.
trickles into all of this worthiness,
Yep.
needing validation by
Mm-hmm.
doing work. And I think that's why as Latinos and just people of color in general, that's why we feel like working hard equals worth. And I'm still unlearning all that. I'm still like giving myself time to rest. I feel guilt and shame for it, you
Yeah.
know? And again, I didn't even realize until now that it comes from that. From every single time I didn't do it right, quote unquote, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
air quoting guys because this is because it just that doesn't make sense. If I wasn't
Right.
doing it correctly, quote unquote, then that day I wasn't worthy of being loved.
Right.
And so then we start to unconsciously associate our actions with love. When love is a feeling, love is given freely, love is something that should be reciprocated. Then it dives into this perfectionism of needing to be
Yes.
perfect. And I
Mhm.
struggled so much with perfectionism. It's just in the last 2 years that I'm really allowing myself to start and do things without them being perfect. Because before, if they weren't perfect and to the T, then we couldn't do them. The project wouldn't, you can't start. You can't start the
I feel
business
you.
without it,
Mhm.
everything being perfect. And that concept now to me, I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. That does
No,
not make
because
sense.
no, because life is messy. Life is never perfect, but this, dialogue that we have within ourselves that was really placed when we were children is like, nope, if this isn't done to the T, then it isn't worthy. You aren't worthy because this isn't perfect. And it's like, nobody's perfect.
It's not
Nobody.
even realistic.
But that is why we need to be able to recognize
Mhm.
that we are carrying all of these things in order for us to actually start the healing process, right? Being able to acknowledge, yes, I felt loved, but internally I felt like I had to work for that love.
Yeah, that's a hard recognition. That's so hard to recognize, and
Mhm.
it's that unlearning portion
Mhm.
of it because a lot of us don't like it's fine to just, yeah, okay, that happened, but then being aware of it and sitting down and feeling it is, I think, one of the hard parts. In all honesty, it is the hard part. It is the hard part of processing. And that's gonna go into the next question that I have. Are there any specific things that we can do, like therapeutic tools or whatever it is, to really heal our inner child per se, address it, like feel it,
Yeah.
allow it to exist? Are there any things that you can personally recommend for someone that's maybe just starting the journey from slate, because I
Yeah.
know there are a lot of people that are just starting and they have no idea where to even start.
So I'm going to be a little biased because this is the type of work that I do. So I think any type of somatic work is wonderful for you to even have any type of insight as to what's going on with your body, right? Because a lot of the times, key to you even starting your healing journey, being able to, one, recognize, okay, shit isn't perfect, but also being able to identify it in our body, right? Being able to recognize, I have a lot of shoulder pain all the time. Why am I so tense all the time when I don't think I'm tense or when I don't feel anxious, but then you're still shrugging because you have all of this tension, and being able to recognize what it is that your body's trying to tell you is going to help gear you towards better healing or towards even recognizing that you need to heal. Yoga and sound baths, I think that those are things that you could do just on your own to be able to ground yourself and to be able to recognize what it is that your body's trying to tell you. But in terms of actual therapy, talk therapy is awesome. That is the basis of any type of relationship that you're building with your therapist, but also diving into more structured work like EMDR or brain spotting, where you actually get to process and really challenge a lot of those core beliefs that you have been, impregnated with since you were little. Right. So actually being able to challenge all of those beliefs that you created based on actions of others or just based on your own actions, that's really where the work is. You being able to unlearn and challenge all of these beliefs that, you know, unfortunately were created for the lacking thereof, you being able to feel love or you being able to feel safe.
That's so interesting that you say that. Again, I was telling you about my journey with finding a therapist and
Hmm.
finding someone that one kind of aligns with me because my one of my friends is a therapist and she gives me all the insights of exactly what you're talking about and the type of connection that you have to have. Like, for example, the therapist that I spoke to yesterday, there's a
Hmm.
little bit of a connection because one, she's Latina, to the practices that she does. So it's really relatable to me. I'm like, because I try to stay in my holistic
Right.
side, I guess you can say, because these things have really helped me not only take away that anxiety, but also bring in that awareness of the
Correct.
pains,
Mhm.
of the trauma, of the
Mhm.
histories that I have that I didn't even know existed within me until I practiced these holistic practices. So I love that you gave us the yoga. I love that you gave us like all the because there are really simple ways that if you can't get a therapist right now, there are really good ways that you can really begin on your own by even and I always tell people start small
Mhm.
because you have never taken a yoga class, or if you have, you haven't done it in a long time, and then you want to go 5 days a week. It's just very unrealistic. You
Yeah,
know,
no, don't do
it's
that.
just, it's actually right. It's actually going to bring in more stress
Right.
because you're putting all this pressure on yourself to show up. Whereas, like, if you show
Mhm.
up 1 time a week, 4 days, 4 times a month, you're still
Mhm.
showing up and you're building up to that practice of self-awareness, of, taking breaths, of just connecting to
Yes.
yourself and to your body and to where it's tense and to where maybe you need to work more. Another thing, and I'm
Mhm.
just kind of throwing this in because it's something that's helped me, it's chiros, like holistic chiropractors.
Yeah.
They'll literally like, oh, Nat, you just have a lot of tension in your shoulder. And bam, he's also Reiki. And I'm not saying
Oh,
this is
yeah.
for everyone. This is not for
Right.
everyone. It works for me, but
Right. No. Reiki is one of the things that I think I started doing during COVID. I started doing distance Reiki, and it helped open up a lot of stuff that was just kind of stuck there, alongside with a new holistic massage therapist that I've been seeing. She's amazing, and her being able to recognize where I'm holding stuff. She was telling me something about the umbilical cord when we're connected to our mom, right? It creates your, stem, right? So if your mom is going through any type of trauma or any type of stress during your like pregnancy, sometimes we see people, and I'm one of those people that have a little hump in the back of your neck, and that's all cells that were built up when your mom was going through it, that as you were being created, your body was literally already holding.
wow, how interesting. I never even thought about that. How interesting that, and there are moms that go through depression during pregnancy
Mhm.
and that have really hard relationships during pregnancy. And so I can really
Right.
see where that connectedness brings us trauma before we're even born. Isn't that crazy?
Mhm.
The thought that we
It
have trauma before we're even born.
And when I first started working with kiddos and our psych eval for them, we asked moms about how their pregnancy was. And when I first started, I couldn't understand why I needed to ask this person how her 9 months of pregnancy were and whether she delivered natural, whether it was a C section. I never understood it until years of actually working with moms and kiddos that I'm like, huh, if mom had a really tough time, there was a lot of stress. What makes me think that once the child was born, mom was able and capable of giving this child the warmth and the safety that they needed as a newborn when all of this stuff was going on all through the 9 months?
And just the thought of that is so impactful to the rest of our lives,
Mhm.
which is insanity to me. And I'm 33 and I never even thought about it like that. I mean, of course, yes, but not this deeply. And so
Right.
it goes to show that for us, sometimes, and it goes back to that quote that I said,
Mhm.
maybe our traumas are not our fault, but it is our responsibility to change them.
Yep.
Our parents always did the best that they could. They really did. And if they didn't, I mean, you need to know better. You need to
Mhm.
want better because you don't want this to
Right.
then affect your own pregnancies or affect your own family or affect your own
Mhm.
friendships or relationships because this goes, I mean, of course, this goes into children and having kids in the future, but really it goes
Right.
deeper than that. It goes into the friendships and the relationships that you're building now.
Yeah.
Because I remember just, I used to be extremely, like I said, angry.
Mhm.
And I used to tell people things, and if you didn't like it, that was your problem. I didn't care. And
Yeah.
I started to lose a lot of friends.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, well, if I'm losing all, that's when I started realizing, I'm like, well, if I'm losing all these friends, then I think the issue's me. I'm like, oh my God, the issue is me. And that was the worst and most hurtful realization
Of
that I
course.
had because I didn't want to be the person that hurt people's feelings.
Mhm.
And I was being the person that no one wanted to be around. And it took years of work. I've been doing this work since 2017. I
Yeah.
now feel in a much healthier place. I now feel like my friends do want to be around me. People want to be around me because of the energy that I exude, but that also went with a lot of healing, right?
Mhm.
A lot of what we're talking about. I
Yeah.
have done a lot of inner child work because I know a lot of the wounds came from when I was a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And even one of those things where I'm the middle child and I'm the only girl in the family. So I have a younger brother and an older brother.
Mhm.
And for me, I felt like I was always trying to get attention, right?
Yep.
Unconsciously. I didn't realize that. It's this middle child syndrome that people talk about.
Yep.
And the baby's always the baby, and he just always gets the attention. And then the older one, oh, he's the older one, so he's the firstborn. So there's this connection that you have with your first. And then there was
Correct.
me, the middle one, who was always just, again, back to the perfectionism. I always tried to be
Mhm.
perfect so that I could get attention.
Correct.
And in reality, it was making me sink deeper into wanting attention. It
Yeah.
was making me sink deeper into that perfectionism that I'm talking about that I had to unlearn. And ironically, my parents like, "Oh, she's independent. Like she can do like, Natalie could
Of
always do it."
course.
And then when
Mhm.
they needed the help, I didn't get the help because I was the perfectionist. I was the person that did everything
Right.
correctly. I was very independent. And so when I asked for that love, unconsciously they weren't giving it because the other two needed the attention or the other two
Yep.
were getting the attention. Then I was just like, all right, well, I guess I'm just here. And I had to go through a lot of therapy to heal that because my parents, they were just like, oh, Natalie's independiente. Like, she got it. She got it, And I'm just like, I don't got it. I don't want to get
Right.
it.
No, and it makes perfect sense because I think a lot of the time this term independent, it really comes from us putting our feelings aside in order for others to shine and to get what they need, right? So if you saw that people were struggling or you seen our parents taking care of our siblings, a lot of the time it's like, well, there's no room for me. I know my sister, she has this condition. And when she was born, I want to say my mom lived and breathed children's hospital for maybe 4 or 5 months. My mom literally lived there. My grandma had moved in with us so that she could help. But how was I supposed to tell my family I was sad or that I was doing these amazing things or that I wanted anything when my sister's life was literally hanging by. So I became this independent person who just kind of knew how to do things, and my parents knew that I knew how to do things. You know, I processed loan documents. I did all of these things because it's like, oh, ella sabe, she's got it. So when big events happen that do end up hurting me, I don't utilize any of my family to help me process. I use this term hermit. I turn into this hermit where I literally just stay within myself and I process whatever it is that I need to process. And my family still thinks, oh, she's doing great. She's working, she's running her business, and she's doing all of these things. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. But I'm actually going through a lot of stuff that I don't know how to share with you because I never really had to. I never really had to share with you that I was, struggling. So now that I'm 33, I don't know how to tell you that I'm hurting because I don't want you to see me hurting because that is what I learned. My feelings go second. I need to make sure that you guys are doing good. I know how to take care of myself.
Isn't that so interesting? I feel like, again,
Mhm.
back to that book that you were saying at the beginning of the episode,
Right.
It's like we're the child taking care of the adult, and the adult
Mhm.
is now the child. And I very much feel like that now. Like I am the responsible one, and I am the one, you know, I have to make sure that everybody's okay before myself. And this year I
Right.
recognized that I can't do that. I can no longer do that. I have boundaries. And
Mhm.
when those boundaries are just not respected or they're not taken into consideration, I can't do it. I can't. And it was a big reason why, and I'm disclosing this because we're here and vulnerability. That's why I don't
Right.
really talk to my dad because there was
Yeah.
boundaries that he didn't respect. And if you don't respect them as much as you are my father and I love you,
Yep.
I love me too.
Yep.
And
I feel
it's
that.
tiring. It's tiring. It's tiring. I'm
It
literally
is.
as I say it, I'm tired.
No, I'm with you. I've been no contact with my father now for about 2 years, and
Mm,
it's more so that feeling I've already set boundaries. I've already shared what it is that I needed in order for me to feel safe to have a relationship again. And unfortunately, the lack thereof ownership and, accountability of certain actions isn't there. So it's like, how am I supposed to feel safe? How am I supposed to tell my inner child, hey, we're safe to go back when as an adult, I don't feel safe?
absolutely. And it's hurtful,
Mhm.
because you just want that inner child of yours to feel safe.
Right.
And again, it circles back
Mhm.
to the lack of safety because it's
Yep.
not only physical safety, it's emotional
Nope.
safety.
Mhm.
So when you lack it, and now when you become aware, and I just want to say this because it comes from experience,
Yeah.
when there's awareness, you may lose people
Yeah.
in the process of that awareness. And it's
Totally.
painful.
Very
Yes,
much
it's
so.
painful.
Mhm.
But do I feel at peace?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't wake up thinking somebody's gonna curse me out for no reason. I don't wake up thinking, okay, today I'm gonna get told that I'm, everything in the sun because I didn't respond to a question the way that you wanted me to.
Right.
Like I'm finally finding that security within myself rather than allowing another person to kind of give that to me. And I cried a lot. There was a lot of crying, a lot of pain, a lot of things that came with that. But there were also a lot of opportunities that were given. There were also a lot of conversations that were had. There were a
Right.
lot of crossing boundaries that happened that
Mhm.
pushed me to this. It wasn't just the
I
one
totally
time
agree.
and
Mhm.
then I just no, forget about it. I'm like, no, it's the continual conversation. You're human and you also have breaking points. And so creating boundaries as hard as it is, they're necessary. So
They
just to
they
yeah, I'm
totally
sorry.
are.
Go ahead.
No, no, no. They totally are, and I think that that's one of the biggest things that our culture doesn't
Mhm.
really recognize
Yeah.
because it's all about the better for the community, right? What is good for everybody.
Yeah.
And the individual gets to not think about themselves. So this whole notion of when you travel, I see that you travel, right? The first thing that they tell you when you hop on board is you put the mask on yourself and then you help whoever it is that's nearby that needs your help. But you have to put the mask on yourself, right? Our community is not taught that.
Absolutely
Our
not.
community is taught you put the mask on everybody else. And if
Mhm.
you get the chance to, you
Yeah.
use the last mask that's available.
Isn't that insane? That sounds crazy. And the way that you're
Yep.
describing it, that's literally what our cultures,
Hmm.
unfortunately, that's what we do.
Yep.
And especially as women,
Of
especially as
course.
women, we
Yep.
were always taught that everybody goes first, the man goes first, children go first, and then maybe if you have some time, maybe then you take care of
Maybe.
yourself. And
Hmm.
we're living in a world now where we get to change that.
Hmm.
And even in Latin American countries, as much as there's a lot of machismo still, there's small little changes that are happening because
Yep.
that airplane analogy was perfect. That's literally what we do. It's just it's toxic. And again, it's that generational thing where it's not an event, it's
Yep.
a whole thing that has had to happen over generations for us to be in that. right? Like
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's just crazy.
And this whole notion of setting boundaries, it's such an abstract thought of how dare you put your needs first and you tell people exactly how you want them to treat you. You end up being the black sheep in the family, right? Where you just don't fit in. Everybody has all these words to say about you, and 75% of the time, they're not good ones because you
Yeah.
are the one that is making everybody feel uncomfortable. You are the one
Hmm.
that is calling people on their ish. It's like it's a lot easier for them to make you look like the bad guy
Yeah.
and to point fingers of like, oh, they think that they're better because they're healing. They think that they're better because they're in therapy. And I'm like, well, I'm not saying I'm better,
Actually,
but this is a lot of hard work. Like having to dive into all the yuckiness, having to dive into the feelings of not being worthy and figuring out, hey, my grandma probably didn't feel worthy either. That's probably why she put up with a lot of stuff that, grandpa did. And I love my grandma and grandpa, and I think that they were the two most amazing co parents that I could have ever had. But I know that there was a lot of stuff that wasn't functioning in a normal way. And everybody just kind of turned the blind eye and it was just normalized. And I'm sure that my grandma went through a lot of thoughts of not feeling worthy and putting herself last in order for my aunts and uncles to have the life that they did, for her grandbabies to feel safe and loved when they were with her. And to have to think about that, wow, she had to go through all of that. And yet I'm still going through that same thought process now. Like, what is wrong with me?
I totally related to the grandparents thing. My both my grandma and grandpa are incredible. They basically raised us. But
Same.
there was a lot of things that my grandma put up with because back then you could not divorce.
Right.
You were shunned if you were divorced.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of worthiness issues within her. Now she's just
Correct.
like the most happy old lady ever. She's the best. But I know that took time. That took a
Yeah.
lot of time, unfortunately. We are getting to the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know if you had any last words about anything that we talked about for our audience before we close out.
I think the biggest thing is that the work is not easy. I think being able to heal that inner child is one of the toughest things as an adult that you can actually do because you are trying to reparent your inner child and letting them know that you are safe now, that you got it, that they get to feel all the feelings. And those feelings are really big, right? And
Absolutely.
it's just, I think it's one of the toughest things that you can ever do for yourself. But I promise you, it's the most magical and most rewarding thing once you actually feel that you're safe and that you're loved and that you're not trying to prove your worth to anybody. You have your voice, you have your power, and you're able to recognize, hey, I'm an amazing person. And if you can't love me for me being this amazing person, then maybe you're just not meant to be part of my life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those words. I feel like they're so encouraging to a person that's really processing them, because
Mm,
when I tell you I lived it and it was not easy and it was hard and it hurt,
yeah.
but I did grow from it and I
Hmm.
really realized what I will and will not put up with.
Yep.
It's healing is not linear, like we said. It is painful.
No.
It is rewarding. It could
Yes,
be,
it is.
yeah, there are a lot of emotions that come with healing. So I love that you said that because it's just kind of like a preparation for people.
Yeah.
Be prepared for everything that's about to come, but the experience of awareness is rewarding. So I just wanted to say that. I really, really appreciate you saying that. And then before we head out, I want to
Mhm.
ask you two separate questions
Okay.
that we love to ask our guests just to see where you are, to get to know you a little bit. The first question is, what's one word that describes the season you're in?
Oh, that's a toughie right now. I'm gonna go with fall because there's a lot of change going on, and I'm really waiting for that, spring blossom to happen because
Yeah.
the leaves are definitely shedding.
Oh, I love that. I love fall because I've never heard the fall. I mean, but I love it. especially because of all the shedding that's happening. I feel that.
Mhm.
The second question is, what's one piece of advice that you'd want to leave behind if you had to leave the earth tonight?
Ooh, these are tough questions. I wish that you would have sent them to me before.
They're surprise. They're surprise questions.
That you are enough. I think
I love that.
being able to recognize that you are enough, I think fits with everything.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And to
Of
everybody
course,
listening, thank you so much for listening in. Jovanna, thank you for being on and for giving us
of
all
course.
this incredible information. I look forward to having more conversations with you. And this definitely did not seem to be your first podcast
Well,
feature.
yay.
So I'm like, this was amazing. And I hope that, the audience really took a lot from this. And if you are looking to connect with Jovanna, I'm going to leave all her information in the show notes below so that you guys can connect. And thank you so much for listening in. Till next time.
No,
Bye,
thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye.